Asian American Pacific Islander, or AAPI's, women journalists are making their places known in newsrooms across the U.S. Representation of AAPIs in newsrooms and their equality, however, still have a long way to go. According to RTDNA, Radio Television Digital News Association's 2020 research and their Newsroom Diversity Report, Asian American women in U.S. newsrooms is only 3%. In this video, I will highlight the issues that women AAPIs are experiencing in newsrooms that have been around since the 1970s with Connie Chung at the helm, along with other journalists that soon followed her. Many of these issues are still relevant today. In the documentary Slaying the Dragon by Deborah Gee, the director touches on the stereotypes perpetuated by Asian American women on television and in the movies, thereby creating a false depiction of Asian American women. Connie Chung is the first AAPI woman journalist to co-anchor a national news program. She paved the way for other Asian American women reporters. As Chung made a name for herself, newsroom executives were looking to replicate her style and persona. The stereotypes of Asian American reporters became an issue that was extremely problematic in the 80s for other journalists attempting to maintain their own identities and find their voices. Emerald Yee, who became a journalist in her own right, felt she was hired because executives wanted her to look like Connie Chung.
And female Asian reporters have been featured in Hollywood scripts.
This is Tracy Sue, WKXT News, Mott Street, Chinatown.
I'm Connie Chung, Bloomingdale's, where a dramatic chapter in Soviet-American relations is being played out.
Besides the Susie Wongs, we now have the new stereotype, Connie Chung's. I mean, they're very specific about it. And even to the point, I've done a little experimenting on my own, and I've told particular clients how to style their hair. They'll go in looking like Connie Chung, and that's the one that gets picked.
Good evening. The nation's third largest oil company filed for bankruptcy protection today.
San Francisco newscaster Emerald Yee discovered that the one who gets picked for the job in the real world of news is also the one who fits the Asian anchorwoman stereotype.
When CNN flew me out for a job interview, I remember the weeks leading up to that, I was really nervous. I wanted to really demonstrate to them that I was a very serious news person because this was a 24-hour news network that I was being interviewed at. So I read the New York Times from cover to cover. I went through all my old journalism books. I even read up on how to be interviewed for jobs so I wouldn't be thrown off by any questions. I was ready for anything. Then I walked into the head of the news division, his office, and the first thing he said to me was, "You look different," which didn't surprise me. We all look different in person. He goes, "Your hair, you've cut your hair." Well, that's not the look that we saw on your audition tape. And in jest, I said, "Well, I can always grow it back." And he said, "How long would it take?" He was serious about it. And I kind of figured out what they wanted me to look like was Connie Chung. They just were never quite satisfied. Then it was my makeup. They said, "Well, we're going to send you to a makeup artist to try to make you look more exotic," which infuriated me. Although I didn't say anything, I just kept it to myself. But I had a lot of repressed anger about that.
And striking Greyhound bus drivers say there will be violence if the company leaves the driving to non-union employees.
But I sensed that I was gradually losing my own self-identity through this. And so I went through a real growing process where during the short time that I was there, a year and a half, I gained strength inside of myself to really feel sure about who I am.
Okay,
All right.
I'll see you later. We're out of time. See you at 11.
Good night.
Well, as far as news programs are concerned, generally speaking, we have a white male who's the dominant authority figure. Frequently, we have an Oriental woman, Chinese or Japanese, as the second person. And the reason for that, I think, is that we know that these people are going to be hardworking and very efficient and effective. That comes from the stereotype of the Oriental hardworking individual. Plus, they're not going to be combative or hassle people too much. Whereas the stereotype we have of the black woman is that she may very well be that way. If you give her any trouble, she'll call you a racist, take you to court, etc. So it's much safer to have a nice Oriental woman in there.
I feel like, whichever I go, whether I conform to the stereotype or whether I defy it, I'm kind of like boxed in by what people think of me. That is, they never really expect me to be they always expect me to be a certain way, and if I go ahead and deviate from that, they, think I'm strange, so I'm outcast that way anyway.
And that's the insidious character of stereotypes. They prescribe what an entire people ought to be. If they're not that way, they better be that way.
I was producer of a show about refugees, and I went out on the shoot the first day, and I was really surprised because the crew told me to wash the equipment in the hall while they went and shot. They were in the classroom shooting this English class, and they went and shot, and I was watching the equipment. I thought, this is ridiculous. I don't know what I'm getting. So I went inside, and the director turned to me and said, "Why aren't you watching the stuff in the hall?" I was really surprised. I mean, this, I figured, is really extraordinary. And I didn't have any explanation for it, except later on I thought this is either because of being female or being Asian or both. But it's very hard to separate those two, being Asian and being female.
In an interview with Julie Patel-Liss, a Cal State LA associate journalism professor, I asked her about her experience working in newsrooms as an Asian American. I inquired about her thoughts on the current issues AAPIs are facing. First and foremost, thank you so much, Ms. Liss, for meeting with me. I know you are very busy, and I really appreciate your time. What challenges would you say AAPI women reporters are dealing with now in newsrooms?
I think maybe if you might start noticing some themes in what Asian American journalists, just because I was on the board of the Asian American Journalists Association in San Francisco, also in Florida, and now, of course, in LA. And so I've seen sort of from our members and from speaking to other friends who are API journalists, I can sort of spot some trends of issues that we deal with that we perhaps have in common. Also, I did something called the Executive Leadership Program through AAJA, and that's like a week-long intensive program for API newsroom leaders, where we get together and we talk about the particular challenges that we face and how to overcome them. And so some of those include, one, this idea that we might be perceived as being sort of passive and keep our heads down and not speak up for ourselves and for our own rights. And because we may be perceived this way, we may be passed up for promotions, or we may be asked to do more work than other people because, we're thought of as people who are not going to complain, because of stereotypes, right? There's stereotypes that are out there. And then also, partly it could be our culture that also affects these stereotypes, because there's, maybe there's like a kernel of truth in some of them, in the sense that, if you're raised by families who are taught to really respect their elders, and certainly I can say that for the Indian culture, we're taught to really revere and respect our elders and not to talk back as much to our elders, to kind of respect them. So if you're raised in that kind of a family or in a structure, then when you go to the workplace, where we're taught to respect our elders, respect our teachers, we may not speak up as much. We may, in fact, not do that. You see what I'm saying?
Of course.
And so then we may be passed up for things that we should be getting based purely on the kinds of stories we're getting and the hard work we're doing. And certainly I've experienced this in my own career, and I'm sure the other people you interview will be able to provide you with anecdotes.
How do we overcome these challenges and these obstacles? It's affecting more than just you and I. It's affecting our entire community. How did you do it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think part of it is having a support network outside of the newsroom through AAJA, but also in the newsroom, because a lot of our AAJA members and leaders were also in my newsroom at the San Jose Mercury News, for instance, and at other newsrooms that I went to later. And so if you have that community inside and outside the newsroom to support you, I think it's easier to speak up.
Tonight, a new era.
Clicking through the channels, you might not see many Asians reporting on the evening news, even though they're the fastest growing segment of the U.S. population. Juju Chang is one of only a handful of Asian American news anchors, and she says it's due to a lack of diversity in top management.
When I went on air at the network here, I was the only Asian American and among the few women. And I'm sad to say that all these many years later, I think that we've gone a long way in terms of diversity in front of the camera, but I think we still have a ways to go behind the scenes, especially in upper management.
Chang says it's important for minorities to be involved when story ideas are approved.
Until Asian Americans get real traction in that sense, we're going to keep, pressing our noses against the invisible window.